The office had floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light just right. Morgan had chosen them herself. She was standing in the hallway with her coffee when Cole walked past her, not to her, past her with Tara 2 steps behind him, heels clicking against the marble floor that Morgan had also chosen. He unlocked the door with a key card. Her key card. "This is yours now," he said to Tara. "Corner office. Best view in the building." Diane stood near the reception desk, hands folded, wearing that purple dress she saved for occasions she considered victories. Nobody looked at Morgan. She set her coffee cup down on the counter, slowly, without a sound. Turned and walked to the elevator, the doors closed. Nobody noticed her hands weren't shaking. Before we go any further, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who they were really dealing with, drop your country and your local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if this channel is new to you, hit subscribe because Morgan's story is just getting started, and you do not want to miss what's coming. Morgan Jenkins did not cry at her father's funeral. People noticed. They always notice things like that, the dry eyes, the straight spine, the woman who stands at the graveside like she's waiting for a meeting to begin rather than a man to be buried. What they didn't know was that Edward Hargrove had made her promise. Don't grieve in public, baby girl. Hargrove women don't hand people that kind of power over them. She had kept that promise. Cole had not made it to the funeral. There was a deal closing in Houston, something about a merger, something that couldn't wait. He'd sent flowers, white lilies. Her father had hated white lilies. She stood at that graveside alone in the November cold, and she counted the people who showed up without being asked. 11. Out of a life that had touched thousands. That was the first thing she filed away. 3 days later, she sat across from Patricia Wells in a law office that smelled like old mahogany and certainty. Patricia slid a sealed envelope across the desk without a word. Morgan opened it. Read every page. Twice. The number at the bottom had 7 zeros before the decimal point. $75 billion. Built over 40 years by a man who wore the same watch for 30 of them and never once mentioned it at dinner. Patricia watched her read. When Morgan finally looked up, Patricia said quietly, "Your father said you'd know when the time was right, Morgan. He said you'll know." Morgan folded the envelope closed, slid it into her bag, stood up and buttoned her coat. She knew. Morgan Jenkins did not cry at her father's funeral. People noticed. They always do. Cole hadn't made it. Houston, a merger, something that couldn't wait. He sent white lilies. Her father had hated white lilies. She stood at the graveside alone, counted the people who came without being asked. 11. Out of a life that had touched thousands. That was the first thing she filed away. Not in anger, just filed. 3 days later, she sat across from Patricia Wells. The office smelled like old mahogany and quiet money. Patricia slid an envelope across without a word. Morgan read every page. Twice. When she looked up, Patricia said softly, "Your father said you'd know when the time was right. He said you'll know." Morgan folded the envelope, slid it into her bag, stood up, and buttoned her coat. She knew. Morgan Jenkins did not cry at her father's funeral. People noticed. They always notice things like that. The dry eyes, the straight spine, the woman who stands at the graveside like she's waiting for a board meeting to begin, rather than a man to be lowered into the ground. 2 of her father's old colleagues leaned into each other and whispered something she couldn't hear. A distant aunt touched her arm and said, "It's okay to let it out, sweetheart." Morgan smiled at her, thin, polite, the kind of smile that ends conversations. She didn't let it out. Edward Hargrove had made her promise a long time ago, on the back porch of the house she grew up in with 2 glasses of sweet tea between them, and the sun going down slow over the oak trees. Don't grieve in public, baby girl. Don't ever hand people that kind of power over you. You feel what you need to feel, but you do it on your own time, in your own space where nobody can use it against you. She had kept that promise for 34 years. She kept it that November morning, too, in the cold, with the wind coming off the hill and her coat not quite warm enough, and 11 people standing around a grave that should have had 100. 11. She counted them. Quietly, the way her father had taught her to count everything: assets, liabilities, loyalties. He had touched thousands of lives over his career, 40 years of decisions, deals, relationships, investments, and 11 people came without being asked. That was the first thing she filed away. Cole had not made it. There was a deal closing in Houston, a merger. He said something that couldn't wait, something that would be over by Thursday, and he would fly straight back and they would grieve together properly, he promised. He sent flowers to the funeral home, white lilies in a tall glass vase with a ribbon that said with deepest sympathy. Her father had hated white lilies, said they smelled like apology. Morgan had stood at the graveside and looked at the empty space beside her where a husband was supposed to be, and she didn't feel the sharp thing she expected to feel. She felt something quieter, something more like recognition, like a number finally adding up the way she had suspected it would for a long time. She filed that away too. 3 days after the funeral, she sat across from Patricia Wells in an office on the 41st floor of a building downtown that most people walk past every day without looking up. The office smelled like old mahogany and careful money, the kind of money that doesn't announce itself, doesn't sit in the window, doesn't need to. Patricia Wells had been her father's attorney for 22 years. She had a face that gave nothing away and hands that moved like every gesture had been considered in advance. She slid a sealed envelope across the desk without a word. Morgan picked it up, broke the seal, began to read. The document was 43 pages long. She read every word. Patricia sat across from her and did not rush. Did not check her phone, did not shift in her chair. She simply waited the way people wait when they already know what's in the envelope and understand that the person reading it needs time to become the person the envelope requires them to be. Morgan turned the last page. The number at the bottom was not something she had expected, even knowing her father, even knowing the outline of what he had built. She had known he was successful, comfortable, private about money the way old-school men of a certain generation were private. He drove a 10-year-old car, wore the same watch for 30 years, never talked about accounts or portfolios at dinner. She had assumed comfortable. She had not assumed this. $75 billion. Not in one place, not in one account or one company or one asset class. Spread across 40 years of quiet, deliberate, invisible work, Hargrove Capital, a private investment firm that operated entirely below public radar, holding real estate venture funds, international equities, private equity stakes in companies Morgan had heard of, but never connected to her father's name. He had built it the way he built everything, without fanfare, without an audience, one decision at a time. She read the number twice. Then she set the page down flat on the desk and looked out the window at the city her father had loved and built inside of, without anyone ever quite knowing it was him. Patricia spoke first. "There is a condition in the will," she said. "Your father was very specific. You have 18 months from the date of his passing to assume full operational control of Hargrove Capital. During that period, the trust remains sealed from public record. No disclosure, no announcement. You observe. You decide who is in your life because of you and who would leave if the money became visible." Morgan turned back from the window. "He designed this as a test," Patricia continued. "Not for you. He never doubted you. He designed it as a test for everyone around you." The room was very quiet. Morgan thought about Cole, about Houston, about white lilies, about the 11 people at the grave, about the space beside her that had been empty when she needed it filled and full of noise every other time. She thought about the office with the floor-to-ceiling windows, the one she had chosen, the one that caught the morning light just right. She thought about Tara's heels on her marble floor. She folded the document back into the envelope with the same steadiness her father had taught her. No trembling, no theater, just hands, doing what hands are supposed to do. She slid it into her bag. She stood. She buttoned her coat one button at a time from the bottom up, the way Edward Hargrove had always told her to. "Start from the foundation, Morgan. Always start from the foundation." She picked up her bag. Patricia was watching her the way people watch someone they've waited a long time to see step into a room they were always meant to be in. "Your father said you'd know when the time was right," Patricia said quietly. "He said Morgan will know." Morgan looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Small, certain. She walked to the door, her hand on the frame, and paused without turning around. "Get the paperwork ready," she said. "All of it." And she walked out into the hallway, into the hum of the city, into the rest of what her father had left her, not just the money, not just the buildings and the funds and the portfolios, but the thing underneath all of it, the plan. The moving company arrived at 7 in the morning. Morgan had scheduled them for a Tuesday deliberately. Tuesday was the day Cole held his weekly leadership meeting on the 3rd floor, the one that ran from 8 to 11 and never finished on time. The one where he sat at the head of the table and talked about vision and momentum and the future of Jenkins and Holt, while the junior staff nodded and took notes and forgot most of it by lunch. He would be occupied. He would not be watching the lobby. She had thought of everything. The movers were quiet and efficient, 2 men she had used before, professionals who understood that some jobs required discretion, the way surgeons understand that some procedures require silence. She gave them a list. They worked from it without asking questions. Framed photographs. The small bronze sculpture her father had given her when she made her first deal at 26. Her research files organized by year in dark green folders that nobody else had ever touched. The plant on the windowsill, a snake plant nearly 4 feet tall, that she had kept alive for 6 years, through 3 office relocations and 1 flood in the building's basement. She took the plant last. She carried it herself down the hall, past the reception desk, where Keisha sat and pretended not to notice, past the conference room, where she could hear Cole's voice rising and falling behind the glass. Past the door to what used to be her office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the morning light, where Tara had already rearranged the furniture and placed a diffuser on the windowsill that filled the hallway with something synthetic and floral that Morgan didn't have a name for. She did not stop. She did not look in. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened. She stepped in, plant in her arms, and watched the lobby disappear as the doors closed behind her. The building she had rented was 11 minutes away on foot. 42 floors. Glass and steel, the kind of architecture that meant business without having to say so. She had signed the lease 3 weeks earlier under Hargrove Capital, a name that meant nothing to anyone in the city yet, which was exactly the point. The suite was on the 38th floor. She had furnished it herself over 2 weekends without telling anyone. Clean lines, dark wood, a long conference table that could seat 14, shelves along the east wall for the green folders, and in the corner by the window that looked out over the financial district, a single chair leather the color of midnight that had belonged to her father. Patricia had arranged to have it shipped from his office the week after the funeral. Morgan set the snake plant on the windowsill beside the chair. She stepped back and looked at the room. It looked like a place where serious things happened. It looked like a place her father would have recognized. It looked for the first time in longer than she could remember like somewhere she belonged, without having to justify it. She sat down in her father's chair. It fit. Raymond Clark arrived at 10:30 with a leather briefcase and the quiet authority of a man who had spent 30 years making large numbers feel manageable. He was CFO of Hargrove Capital, had been in fact for 19 of those years, reporting directly to Edward Hargrove in a working relationship that Morgan now understood had been one of the most important of her father's life. He shook her hand the way people shake hands when they mean it. Firm, brief, no performance. "I worked for your father for nearly 2 decades, he said, settling into the chair across from her. "He spoke about you often, more than you probably knew." Morgan looked at him steadily. "What did he say?" Raymond allowed himself a small smile. "He said you were the only person he'd ever met who could read a room and a balance sheet with equal accuracy." He paused. "He said the business world wasn't ready for you yet. He thought it might take them a while to catch up." She felt something move in her chest. Not grief exactly. Something adjacent to it, the particular ache of being known by someone you can no longer speak to. She let it pass. Filed it away. "Walk me through the portfolio," she said. Raymond opened the briefcase. What came out was not a summary. It was not an overview or an executive brief. It was the full picture, 40 years of acquisitions, investments, divestitures, and returns laid out in a sequence that told a story as clearly as any narrative she had ever read. Real estate holdings across 11 cities. Venture stakes in 23 technology companies, 7 of which had gone public. A private equity fund with $4 billion under management. International equities in markets her father had entered quietly decades before they became fashionable. And then Raymond turned to a page near the back of the portfolio and placed it in front of her without comment. She looked at it. Jenkins and Holt Consulting. The company she and Cole had built together over 9 years. The company whose logo she had designed herself on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea and a sketch pad. The company whose first office had been a single room above a print shop that smelled like ink and ambition. Hargrove Capital held 41% of its shares. Morgan looked up. "Your father began acquiring quietly about 6 years ago," Raymond said. "Small positions, different holding companies, never enough at once to trigger disclosure. He never told you because he didn't want to influence your decisions inside the company. But he was watching." The room was very still. "He wanted you to have options," Raymond continued. "Whatever you decided to stay to leave to restructure, he wanted you to have the leverage to do it on your own terms." Morgan looked back at the page, at the number, at the name of the company printed in clean black type above a percentage that represented 9 years of her life viewed through her father's eyes. 41%. She thought about Cole in the leadership meeting 2 floors below her, talking about vision and momentum and the future of Jenkins and Holt. She thought about Tara's diffuser on her windowsill, the synthetic floral smell in the hallway. She thought about what 41% meant and what it could become with the right additions and how long it might take and whether 11 minutes was close enough to watch without being seen. She picked up her pen. What would it take, she said, to get to 61? Raymond looked at her for a moment. Then he reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a second folder. He had already run the numbers. 3 to 4 months, he said. If we move carefully. Morgan opened the folder, began to read. Outside the window, the city moved in its usual rhythm, indifferent, relentless, full of people, making decisions that would define the rest of their lives without knowing it yet. 11 minutes away, Cole Jenkins was still talking about vision. He had no idea what was being built in his direction. The restaurant Cole chose was called Meridian, 43rd floor. Private dining room with a view of the city that cost extra and was worth it according to the kind of people who measured worth in views. He had reserved it 6 weeks in advance. Morgan knew this because she had seen the confirmation email come through on the shared calendar before she removed her access quietly and without announcement 3 weeks ago. He had not noticed. That told her something. The dinner was billed in the invitation that went out to 14 of Jenkins and Holt's senior partners and their spouses as a celebration of the firm's next chapter. That was the phrase Cole had used. Next chapter. As though the previous chapters had simply concluded naturally the way chapters do, rather than been torn out and rewritten by a man who had decided his current life was no longer the one he wanted. Morgan was not on the guest list. She knew the menu, though. She knew the wine, a 2019 Burgundy that Cole had been saving for what he called the right occasion. She knew the centerpieces would be tall white arrangements because Diane always requested tall white arrangements at events she considered important. She knew that Tara would wear something red because Tara had worn something red to every significant occasion Morgan had observed her at, and people who find something that works tend to repeat it. She knew all of this because she had learned over 9 years of marriage that Cole Jenkins was a man of patterns. He believed he was spontaneous. He was not. He was the most patterned person she had ever known, predictable in his ambitions, his vanities, his blind spots, and above all in his absolute certainty that he was the most important person in any room he walked into. That certainty was going to cost him everything, but not yet. At 7:45, while 14 people in a private dining room on the 43rd floor of Meridian raised glasses of 2019 Burgundy to the next chapter of Jenkins and Holt, Morgan was sitting at her desk on the 38th floor of a building 11 minutes away, eating takeout from the Thai place on the corner and reading a quarterly report on a venture fund her father had seeded 12 years ago that had quietly returned 400%. She was not thinking about the dinner. She was thinking about a clause on page 19 of the Jenkins and Holt Partnership Agreement, a clause she had helped draft 7 years ago at 2 a.m. on a laptop balanced on her knees in the back of a car on the way home from a client meeting that outlined the conditions under which a majority shareholder could call a special session of the board. Majority shareholder. She underlined the clause, wrote a number in the margin, circled it. 61%. Raymond had confirmed that morning that they were at 53. 8 more points. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if the remaining shares moved the way the modeling suggested. She had approved 3 acquisition tranches before noon through 4 separate holding entities, none of which bore her name or her father's. Cole would not see it coming. He was not looking in this direction. He was looking at Tara, at Diane's approval, at the tall white centerpieces and the Burgundy, and the 14 people raising their glasses to a future he had designed entirely around the assumption that Morgan Jenkins was done. She took a bite of her noodles. She turned to page 20. At Meridian, the dinner had reached the point in the evening where the food was finished, and the wine had made everyone generous, and Cole felt the particular warmth of a man who believes things are going exactly according to plan. Tara sat to his right. She wore red, a structured dress with a neckline that Diane had quietly approved, with a single nod when she arrived. She laughed at the right moments and asked questions that made the partners feel interesting, and touched Cole's arm exactly twice in the first hour, which was the precise frequency that communicated, "We are together without communicating we are inappropriate." She was good at this. Morgan gave her that. Diane sat at the far end of the table in her purple and gold, the way she always sat at the far end, close enough to observe everything far enough to maintain the appearance of not controlling it. She had ordered sparkling water. She always ordered sparkling water at events where she needed to remember every detail of what was said. Midway through the evening, one of the senior partners, a man named Gerald, who had been with the firm for 11 years and had a habit of asking the questions nobody else wanted to ask, leaned toward Cole with the easy directness of someone 3 glasses in. "Cole, I have to ask, where's Morgan in all of this? The invitation said next chapter, but I don't see her here." The table shifted. not visibly. But Morgan would have felt it had she been there. That particular atmospheric change when a room full of people simultaneously decide whether to look at someone or away from them. Cole smiled. The smile he used when he needed to make something uncomfortable sound like a choice he had made thoughtfully on behalf of everyone involved. Morgan's taking some time for herself, he said. She's been through a lot with her father's passing. We both felt it was best for her to step back, recharge. She sends her best. She sends her best. Morgan had sent nothing. Morgan did not know this dinner was being described as a mutual decision. Morgan was 11 minutes away on page 23 of the partnership agreement, making notes in the margin with the pen her father had given her. Gerald nodded, seemed to accept this, picked up his glass. But Diane at the far end of the table watched Cole deliver that line and felt the first faint movement of something she could not quite name. Not doubt exactly. Something smaller. A thread barely visible that she wanted to reach out and pull, and decided for now to leave alone. She sipped her sparkling water. She watched Tara laugh at something Cole said. She watched Gerald go back to his wine. She filed the thread away. At 9:17, Cole's phone buzzed on the table beside his dessert plate. He glanced at it out of habit. An email. From a legal firm he didn't recognize. Subject line, Notice of Independent Legal Representation, Jenkins M.H. He read it once. Then again. The warmth of the evening moved through him and out the other side, leaving something cooler in its place. He set the phone face down on the table, picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. Tara was saying something to the partner on her right. Diane was watching Cole from the end of the table with an expression he could not read from this distance. He thought about the email. Independent legal representation. He thought about Morgan's office empty now, her things gone cleared out so cleanly that if you didn't know what had been there before, you might think it had always been a storage room. He thought about the last time he had actually looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her. He could not remember exactly when that had been. He thought about the way she had set her coffee cup down that morning in the lobby. Slowly, without a sound. He picked up his phone again, opened her contact, typed, "We should talk." He stared at it for a moment, then he sent it. 3 floors above the city, in a restaurant that cost extra for the view, Cole Jenkins waited for 3 dots to appear on his screen. They did not appear. They would not appear that night, or the next morning, or the morning after that, because Morgan Jenkins was 11 minutes away in her father's chair, reading page 27 of a partnership agreement, with the focused attention of a woman who had already decided that the time for talking was over. The time for something else entirely had begun. Morgan woke at 5:15 every morning. Not because an alarm told her to, because her father had woken at 5:15 every morning for as long as she could remember, and somewhere in the 20 years she had spent watching him move through the world, his rhythm had become hers, without either of them planning it. He used to say that the hour before sunrise belonged to the people who understood that preparation was not a strategy, it was a practice. Something you did every day without exception, whether you felt like it or not. She felt like it. She was at her desk by 6. Coffee from the machine in the small kitchen off the hallway, black no sugar, the way her father had taught her to drink it at 14, with the patient insistence of a man who believed that acquiring discipline in small things was how you built the capacity for discipline in large ones. The city below was still in its early version of itself, quieter, slower, the streets not yet crowded with the particular urgency that descended on the financial district by 8. She liked this hour. It belonged to her. She worked. In the 6 weeks since she had moved into the 38th floor of the Hargrove Capitol Suite, Morgan had signed 47 documents, attended 19 meetings, reviewed 3 fund restructuring proposals, approved 2 new board appointments, and overseen the quiet acquisition of an additional 19% of Jenkins and Holt through a network of holding entities that Raymond had assembled with the precision of a man who had spent his career making large movements invisible. They were at 70% now. She had passed 61 without ceremony. Raymond had sent a single text message on a Wednesday afternoon that said only done. She had read it, set her phone face down, and gone back to the report she was reading. There would be time for ceremony later. Right now there was work. The work was not what she had expected. She had expected the scale of it to be overwhelming $75 billion, spread across 40 years of decisions made by a man she had known as her father before she knew him as a businessman. She had expected to feel small inside it the way you feel small when you step into a room that was built for someone larger than you. Instead, she felt like she was reading a letter. Her father's voice was in every decision, the patience of the long positions, the discipline of the diversification, the absolute refusal to chase trends or make choices based on what would look good in the short term. Every page of the portfolio told her something about who he had been when she wasn't in the room, and what she found there was consistent with the man who had raised her in every detail that mattered. He had built something real. He had built it carefully, and he had left it entirely to her. She was not going to waste it. Patricia came in on Thursdays. She would arrive at 9 with a structured tote bag and a container of the jerk chicken from the place on Halstead that she had been eating every Thursday for 12 years, and she would sit across from Morgan at the conference table, and they would work through the legal architecture of everything that needed to happen next. The divorce filing had gone in 4 weeks ago. Cole's attorneys had responded with the predictable opening position, a claim on marital assets, a challenge to the prenuptial agreement, a letter that was professionally worded and substantively hollow, and that Patricia had read once set aside and described in a single word. Noise, she said on that Thursday morning, placing the letter on the table between them. That's all this is. Noise from people who haven't read the prenup carefully enough to understand that there is nothing here for them to claim. Morgan looked at the letter. How long before they figure that out? 2 weeks, maybe 3. When they actually read the prenuptial agreement, the full version, not the summary their client gave them, they will understand that every dollar of the Hargrove estate is categorically excluded from marital property under Clause 14, Subclause C, which your father's attorneys drafted specifically to be airtight. Patricia picked up her fork. Cole signed it, 9 years ago, in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. Whatever he told himself it said at the time is not relevant to what it actually says. Morgan nodded. And Jenkins and Holt, she said. Patricia set her fork down. That is a separate conversation, and a more interesting one. She reached into the tote and produced a folder, not one of the green ones, a gray one, the color Patricia used for documents that required particular attention. Cole has been restructuring the firm's equity, she said, quietly, over the past 8 months, moving shares between entities, diluting certain positions, reclassifying assets in ways that would only make sense if someone were preparing for a legal separation of interests. Morgan was very still. He was protecting the firm from the divorce. He was trying to, Patricia said. What he did not account for, what he could not have known to account for, is that the entity he was restructuring around is no longer the majority owner of Jenkins and Holt. The room was quiet. He has been rearranging furniture, Patricia said, in a house that belongs to someone else. Morgan looked at the gray folder. She thought about Cole in the leadership meeting every Tuesday talking about vision and momentum. She thought about him at Meridian with the burgundy and the tall white centerpieces. She thought about the text message she had never answered. We should talk. She thought about all the times over 9 years that she had tried to talk, about the decisions she had raised and been talked past, about the directions she had proposed and watched get credited to someone else 6 months later when Cole presented them as his own at a client meeting. About the morning she had stood in the hallway with her coffee and watched her keycard disappear into another woman's hand. She thought about her father at 5:15 in the morning, moving through the dark house toward the kitchen, already thinking about the day. Preparation is not a strategy. It is a practice. She opened the gray folder. On a Friday afternoon in the 5th week, something shifted at Jenkins and Holt. A client, one of the firm's top 5, an infrastructure fund that generated roughly 18% of annual revenue, sent a letter requesting a meeting to discuss the renewal of their advisory contract. Standard language. Routine timing. Except that the letter was addressed not to Cole Jenkins, but to the managing director of the majority shareholder entity. Cole's assistant brought it to him at 3 in the afternoon. He read it standing at his desk jacket still on from a lunch meeting, and read it again, and then a third time because the third time through he noticed that the letter referenced a due diligence report on Jenkins and Holt's ownership structure that the fund had commissioned independently. A due diligence report on the ownership structure. He put the letter down, picked up his phone, called his attorney. The call lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, Cole sat down in his chair, slowly the way people sit, when their legs have decided something before their mind has caught up, and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His windows now. He thought about Morgan carrying her plant out of this office. He had seen her briefly from the hallway, hadn't thought much of it at the time, assumed she was taking it home, assumed she needed time, assumed the things people assume when they are not paying attention. He thought about the email from the legal firm, the unanswered text. He thought about Patricia Wells and who Patricia Wells worked for and had always worked for. He thought about a name he had seen once in passing on a brass plate in a lobby of a building he walked past sometimes on the way to lunch. Hargrove Capital. He had never thought to look it up. He was thinking about it now. He picked up his phone again. typed Patricia Wells into the search bar, found her firm, found her client list, the public version, the one that told you almost nothing but enough if you knew what you were looking at. His hands were steady, but something behind his sternum was not. Patricia Wells, he said to no one in the empty office in the quiet of 3:47 on a Friday afternoon. Who exactly are you working for? 11 minutes away in her father's chair, Morgan Jenkins signed the last of the acquisition documents, capped her pen, and set it down on the desk in the particular silence of a woman who has done what she came to do. Raymond would file the paperwork Monday morning. After that, nothing at Jenkins and Holt would happen without her permission. The first crack appeared on a Monday. Not dramatically, not with the sound of something breaking or the visibility of something falling. The first crack appeared the way cracks in load-bearing structures always appear quietly in a place nobody was watching along a line that had been under pressure for longer than anyone had acknowledged. A partner withdrew. His name was Dennis Holt. The other half of Jenkins and Holt, the man whose name was on the door alongside Cole's, who had been there from the single room above the print shop that smelled like ink and ambition, who had shaken Cole's hand on a sidewalk 9 years ago and said, "I think we can build something real here," and meant it. He sent an email, not to the staff, not to the clients. Directly to Cole at 7:12 in the morning, before the office opened, before anyone else was at their desk. The subject line was 3 words. "We need to talk." Cole read it at 7:14, standing in his kitchen in his robe, and felt something cold move through him that the coffee in his hand did nothing to address. The meeting happened that afternoon in Dennis's office with the door closed and the blinds angled down the way Dennis angled them when he didn't want people in the open plan area reading the room. Dennis was 61 years old. He had a wife, 3 adult children, and the particular steadiness of a man who had made enough decisions over a long career to recognize when a situation had moved beyond the point where steadiness alone could fix it. He sat across from Cole, and he did not use the careful language of corporate exits. He used plain language, the language of someone who respected the other person enough to be direct even when directness was uncomfortable. "I've been doing some reading," Dennis said, "about the ownership structure, about certain changes over the past 14 months that I wasn't consulted on, about a due diligence report that Caldwell Infrastructure commissioned that I also wasn't consulted on until they sent me a copy last Friday as a courtesy." Cole opened his mouth. Dennis held up one hand. "Not aggressively, just not yet. I've also been thinking," Dennis continued, "about Morgan, about what her role actually was in this firm operationally over the years, and about some decisions that went well and some that didn't, and which ones she was behind and which ones she wasn't, and what that pattern looks like when you lay it out in a line." The room was very quiet. "Cole," Dennis said, "I've been your partner for 9 years. I'm not walking away from that lightly. But I need you to tell me honestly what is happening with the ownership of this firm, because what I'm reading in this due diligence report does not match what I understood our structure to be." Cole looked at his partner of 9 years and said the only thing he could say, which was that he was looking into it, that there had been some administrative restructuring, that it was complex but manageable, that he had it under control. Dennis nodded, slowly. The nod of a man cataloging information rather than accepting it. "I hope so," he said. "I genuinely do." He stood up. The meeting was over. Cole drove home that evening on autopilot, the city sliding past the windows of his car in a blur of streetlights and headlights, and the particular loneliness of a man who is beginning to understand that the ground beneath him is not as solid as he had believed. Tara noticed things. This was something Cole had initially found attractive about her, the attentiveness, the way she read situations quickly and adjusted. In the early months, it had felt like intelligence. Now, 4 months into living in the same space and sharing the same accounts and being present for the daily reality of his life, rather than the curated version he had presented at the conference where they met, it felt like something else. It felt like surveillance. She had questions, not aggressive ones. Tara was too smart for aggressive questions. They came sideways, embedded in conversation, wrapped in the language of concern or curiosity or practical necessity. "How are things looking for Q3? Over dinner, casual, not looking up from her plate. That Caldwell letter seemed to stress you out. Is that a big account?" On a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, the question dropped into the silence between them like a stone into still water. "Your accountant called twice this week. Is there anything you need me to help with?" Cole answered each question the way he answered all uncomfortable questions, with a version of the truth that was shaped to produce the response he wanted rather than the understanding he owed. Fine. Manageable. No, he had it handled. He was not fine. It was not manageable. He did not have it handled. What he had on a Tuesday evening in the 7th week since Morgan had walked out of the building carrying her snake plant was a firm whose largest client was asking questions he couldn't answer, a partner who was reading due diligence reports as a courtesy from other parties, an IRS audit notice that had arrived that morning for a subsidiary account that he was fairly certain should not have been structured the way it was structured, and a text message from his attorney that said, "Call me today." Not tomorrow. Today. He had not called yet. He was sitting in the kitchen instead, in the house that still had Morgan's handwriting on the grocery list, magneted to the refrigerator she had written it the morning before everything happened, and he had not removed it. Not because he was sentimental, but because he genuinely had not noticed it until 3 days ago, and now every time he looked at it, he felt the specific discomfort of a man confronting evidence that someone's presence was more woven into the fabric of his daily life than he had accounted for when he decided to remove it. Almond milk, lemons, green tea. The good olive oil, not the other one. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked away. The file was in a drawer in the home office. Tara found it on a Wednesday afternoon while looking for the stapler. It was a manila folder unlabeled, and she almost put it back without opening it, because she had made a private agreement with herself when she moved in that she would not be the kind of person who went through someone else's things. She believed in that agreement. She considered it a point of personal integrity. She opened the folder. Inside were 12 pages of a contract, a consulting agreement between Jenkins and Holt and a company called Meridian Advisory Services. The contract was dated 8 months ago. The signatory on behalf of Meridian Advisory Services was listed as T. Sims, Tara Sims. Her name, her signature. She turned the page, and the next, and the next. The contract was not for consulting services. The contract was a personal guarantee, a legal instrument in which T. Sims agreed to assume personal liability for a debt of $4,200,000 owed by Jenkins and Holt to a private creditor in the event that Jenkins and Holt defaulted on the repayment schedule outlined in Exhibit B. She sat down on the floor of the home office. She read the document again. From the beginning, every word. The way Morgan had read the document in Patricia's office, not skimming, not hoping something would resolve itself, but reading the way you read something when you need to understand exactly what has been done to you. Her signature was on page 9. And page 11, and the final page. She did not remember signing this. She did not remember any conversation about this. She did not remember a Meridian Advisory Services or a private creditor or $4,200,000. She sat on the floor of Cole Jenkins's home office for a very long time. Then she stood up, straightened her clothes, put the folder back in the drawer precisely as she had found it, went to the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea with the steadiness of a woman deciding something important. She picked up her phone. She did not call Cole. She called a lawyer. The lawyer Tara called was named Susan Holt. No relation to Dennis, just a name she had saved in her phone 8 months ago after a friend recommended her a corporate attorney who specialized in contract disputes and had a reputation for being the kind of person you wanted in your corner when the other side had more resources than you did. Tara had saved the number with the vague intention of never needing it. She needed it now. The meeting happened 2 days later in a small conference room on the 22nd floor of a building downtown that was deliberately unimpressive, the kind of office that told you the attorney spent her budget on expertise rather than aesthetics. Susan Holt was 54, natural gray locks, pulled back reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the focused economy of movement that belongs to people who have sat across from a great many difficult situations and learned not to waste energy on the ones that don't require it. Tara placed the folder on the table. Susan read it without expression. The kind of without expression that is itself an expression-controlled professional, the face of someone absorbing information and organizing it simultaneously. When she finished, she set it down, removed her glasses, looked at Tara directly. "Did you sign this?" she said. "I don't remember signing it," Tara said. "That's my signature. But I don't remember the document. I don't remember the conversation. I don't remember anyone explaining to me what a personal guarantee was or what I was agreeing to." Susan was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Sims," she said carefully, "do you have any documents, emails, texts, anything in which Mr. Jenkins discusses Meridian Advisory Services or this creditor arrangement with you?" "No," Tara said. "Any memory of signing documents in his presence that were presented to you quickly, perhaps, in a context where you didn't have time to read them carefully?" Tara thought about 8 months ago, about a Sunday afternoon when Cole had come home with a stack of papers and said he needed her signature on some administrative things for the firm. Nothing important, just housekeeping. And she had signed where he pointed because she trusted him and because the sun was coming through the windows and they had dinner reservations, and it had seemed like exactly what he said it was. Nothing important. Just housekeeping. Yes, she said. Susan nodded once. Put her glasses back on. Then we have a problem, she said. And by we, I mean Mr. Jenkins. The IRS letter arrived at Jenkins and Holt on a Thursday morning. Cole's assistant placed it on his desk at 8:47 with the particular careful neutrality of someone who has read the return address and understood that this was not her problem to have feelings about. Cole opened it at 9:15 between a client call and a staff meeting and read the first paragraph and then set it down and canceled the staff meeting. The letter was a formal notice of audit. The subsidiary in question, a holding entity called JH Advisory LLC, had been flagged for irregular transactions over a 20-month period. The total value under review was listed on page 2, $3,800,000. Cole sat very still. He knew about the transactions. He had authorized them not directly, not in writing, not in any way that would be immediately traceable, but he had authorized them in the way powerful men authorize things they don't want, documented through implication, through the creation of conditions in which a subordinate understands what is expected without being told explicitly. The subordinate in question had left the firm 5 months ago. Cole had assumed the matter was closed. He had assumed incorrectly. He called his attorney at 9:22. The call lasted 38 minutes. When it ended, he sat at his desk and looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his windows, the ones that had always been his, the ones with the view that made partners feel important, and thought about the sequence of decisions that had brought him to 9:22 on a Thursday morning with an IRS audit notice on his desk and a personal guarantee signed by his girlfriend for $4 million she didn't know about, and a due diligence report circulating among his clients, and a partner who was reading everything very carefully. He thought about Morgan, not with guilt exactly. Cole Jenkins was not a man who moved easily through guilt. He had a talent developed over decades for reframing his own decisions in terms that distributed responsibility outward and preserved his self-conception as a person of reasonable intentions. What he felt was closer to the particular unease of a man who was beginning to suspect that what he had categorized as an absence. Morgan's quiet, Morgan's patience, Morgan's willingness to absorb and not retaliate had actually been something else entirely. He picked up his phone, opened her contact, set it down again. Diane came to the office unannounced on a Friday afternoon. This was not unusual. Diane Okafor had been coming to Jenkins and Holt unannounced. Since the firm opened, she considered it her prerogative, the way mothers of founders sometimes do, a quiet assertion of access that had never been formally granted and never been formally refused. She would arrive, sit in the good chair in Cole's office, drink the tea his assistant brought without being asked, and dispense the kind of advice that arrived dressed as observation. She arrived at 2:30. Cole was on the phone. She sat in the good chair and waited in the purple and gold dress she wore when she considered something important, with the sparkling water his assistant brought without being asked. When Cole ended the call, she looked at him for a long moment with the focused assessment she had been applying to situations since before he was born. "You look terrible," she said, and "Thank you, Mom." "I'm not being unkind. I'm being accurate." She set down her sparkling water. "Tell me what's happening." Cole told her. Not everything. He never told anyone everything but enough. The audit, the due diligence report, Dennis's email, the client questions, the ownership structure, irregularities that his attorney was still trying to map. Diane listened without interrupting. This was unusual. Diane Okafor was not a woman who listened without interrupting. The fact that she did told Cole more about how seriously she was taking this than anything she might have said. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The ownership structure," she said finally. "Who holds the majority?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Cole said. "It's been acquired through holding entities. Our attorneys are working on tracing the chain." Diane looked at him steadily. "Cole, who do you think it is?" He looked at his hands. "I don't know." It was the first true thing he had said in weeks. Diane picked up her sparkling water, set it down without drinking, and said in the tone she used when she was thinking out loud in a way she would later wish she hadn't, "I always thought Morgan was more organized than she let on. I said that to you, I think, early on. Before she stopped." "Before what?" Cole said. Diane looked at him. Then at the window. Then back at him. "Before Tara," she said quietly. With something in her voice that Cole had not heard there before, not regret exactly. Something adjacent. The sound of a woman recalculating. Tara walked into the offices of the Internal Revenue Service on a Monday morning at 9 a.m., with Susan Holt beside her in a structured tote bag that contained, among other things, a folder with 12 pages of a personal guarantee she had not knowingly signed, a series of text messages in which Cole had referenced the Meridian arrangement in terms oblique enough to be deniable but specific enough to be meaningful, and a USB drive with copies of 17 documents that Susan had advised her to preserve as a precautionary measure the moment she understood the nature of what she was dealing with. She wore a dark blazer and flat shoes. She had slept well. She had made her decision 4 days ago in the kitchen of Cole's house over a cup of tea, and she had not second-guessed it since, because she had learned at 29 that the decisions you make in stillness tend to be the ones you can live with. The investigator across the table was a woman in her 40s with the patient attention of someone who had heard many versions of many stories and had developed an accurate sense of which ones were worth pursuing. Tara placed the folder on the table. "I have everything," she said. And then, because Susan had advised her to say nothing further until asked, she folded her hands in her lap and waited. In the same moment, 11 blocks away, Diane Okafor sat in the passenger seat of a car outside Jenkins and Holt and called a lawyer she had not spoken to in 6 years because she had said something in Cole's office on Friday afternoon in front of his attorney, who had been present taking notes in a capacity Diane had not fully registered until she was in the elevator going down, that she now understood she should not have said. "I always thought Morgan was more organized than she let on." 6 words. Innocent on their own. Devastating in context. She listened to the phone ring. Outside the car window, the city moved in its usual rhythm, indifferent, relentless, full of people making decisions that would define the rest of their lives without knowing it yet. The phone connected. "I need to speak with someone," Diane said. "Today. It's urgent." The summons arrived on a Wednesday. Not by email. Not through an assistant or a junior associate or any of the soft channels, through which uncomfortable information is usually delivered in the corporate world. It arrived by courier in a cream-colored envelope with the Jenkins and Holt letterhead on the outside and a return address that Cole did not immediately recognize, a law firm he had never dealt with, on a floor of a building he had walked past 100 times without looking up. His assistant brought it to him at 10:40. She placed it on his desk with both hands, which was not her usual practice, and left without saying anything, which was also not her usual practice. Cole opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Single page, clean typography. The language of legal documents, precise, bloodless, designed to communicate consequence without emotion. Hargrove Capital LLC, as majority shareholder, representing 70% of outstanding equity in Jenkins and Holt Consulting Group, hereby requests a special session of the Board of Directors pursuant to Article 7, Section 3 of the Jenkins and Holt Partnership Agreement, to be convened no later than 14 days from the date of this notice. The purpose of the session: a full review of operational governance financial irregularities as identified in the attached audit summary, and the appointment of new executive leadership effective upon majority vote. He read it twice. Then he read it a third time slowly, the way you read something when your mind keeps sliding off the words because it does not want to process what they mean. 70%, Hargrove Capital, new executive leadership. He set the letter down on his desk. Very carefully, the way you set down something that might break or might already be broken and you are not yet sure which. He called his attorney at 11:03. The call lasted 41 minutes and covered in sequence whether the notice was legally valid, which it was, whether Article 7, Section 3 actually permitted this, which it did, whether there was any mechanism by which a minority shareholder could delay or block a special session called by a 70% majority, which there was not, and finally who Hargrove Capital was and how they had come to hold 70% of Jenkins and Holt without Cole knowing about it. His attorney did not have an answer to the last question. Not yet. He said he would need 48 hours. Cole said he needed it in 24. He hung up and sat in the chair that had always been his chair in the office, that had always been his office, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had always given him the particular satisfaction of a man who believed that the view from where he sat was evidence of how far he had come. The view looked different today. It looked like something you could fall from. He called Tara at 11:47. The call went to voicemail. He called again at noon. Voicemail. He sent a text, "We need to talk." Today? He stared at the screen for 3 minutes. No response. He called Dennis at 12:15. Dennis answered on the second ring, which surprised him. Dennis had been taking longer to answer lately, in the subtle way of a man creating distance without making it official. "Did you get the notice?" Cole said. A pause. "Yes." Did you know about this about Hargrove Capital? Another pause. Longer. Cole. Dennis said, I think you should talk to your attorney. I'm asking you. And I'm telling you to talk to your attorney. Dennis's voice was even. Not cold. Dennis Holt was not a cold man, but even in the way of someone who has made a decision and is not going to be talked out of it by the discomfort of the person on the other end of the line. I'll be at the board session. We can talk properly then. The call ended. Cole set his phone face down on the desk, looked at the ceiling, breathed. Patricia filed the divorce papers that afternoon. Not because the timing was coordinated with the board summons, it wasn't, or rather it was coordinated in the sense that all of Morgan's movements were coordinated, which was to say they followed a logical sequence designed around outcomes rather than emotion, and the outcome Morgan had been working toward did not require drama or simultaneity. It simply required that each thing happen when it was ready. The divorce papers were ready. Cole's attorney called him at 3:17 to inform him that he had been served. Cole was still at his desk. He had not left his office since the courier arrived at 10:40. His lunch sat untouched on the corner of the desk, a sandwich his assistant had ordered and brought in at 1, which he had thanked her for and not eaten. The same day, Cole said. Yes, his attorney said. Is that legal? Yes. Common. No. Intentional, almost certainly. Cole looked at the sandwich, at the window, at the letter from Hargrove Capital still sitting on his desk, where he had placed it at 10:40 that morning. Who is Hargrove Capital? He said. His attorney was quiet for exactly 2 seconds too long. We're still? Who is it? Cole said. Cole. A breath. The registered principal of Hargrove Capital, LLC, is listed in the Delaware Incorporation documents as Morgan Hargrove Jenkins. The office was very quiet. Outside, the city continued. Cars moved, people walked. The financial district conducted its afternoon business with the indifference of a machine that does not notice individual components. Cole Jenkins sat in his chair and said nothing for a long time. Morgan Hargrove Jenkins. Hargrove. He had known her last name was Hargrove before Jenkins. She had kept both after the marriage professionally, and he had never asked why the way you don't ask about things that seem like personal preference rather than significant information. He had never connected Hargrove to anything larger than her. Had never thought to. He thought about it now. He thought about Edward Hargrove Morgan's father, a quiet man who drove an old car and wore the same watch for 30 years and never talked about money at dinner. A man Cole had met perhaps 15 times over 9 years of marriage at holidays and the occasional family gathering, and had categorized without much examination as comfortable. Retired. Unremarkable. He thought about the funeral he had missed. Houston. The merger. The white lilies. He thought about Morgan standing at the graveside alone in the November cold and what she might have been thinking. He thought about the sum printed on the Hargrove Capital Incorporation documents that his attorney had just read to him. $75 billion. The number sat in the air of his office like a physical object. Diane called at 4:30. She had been trying to reach him since noon. He had let the calls go to voicemail, not deliberately, simply because he had not had the capacity for her voice on top of everything else. But at 4:30 he picked up, because the alternative was sitting in the silence of his own office for another hour, and he had reached the limit of what that silence could hold. I spoke with an attorney, Diane said, without preamble, without the usual opening of a woman who liked to establish the terms of a conversation before entering it. Okay, Cole said. I said something in your office on Friday, in front of your attorney. Cole closed his eyes. I know. I didn't realize he was I know, Mom. A silence. Then, Cole, who is Hargrove Capital? He looked at the letter on his desk, at the number his attorney had read to him, at the window and the view and the city below. It's Morgan, he said. The silence on the other end of the line was a different quality of silence than the ones that had preceded it, not the silence of thinking or recalibrating, but the silence of a woman who has just had something confirmed that she suspected and hoped was wrong. Her father, Diane said finally. Not a question. A calculation completing itself out loud. Yes. Another silence. Cole, Diane said, and her voice had changed in a way he had not heard before, quieter, with the particular texture of a woman setting down something heavy she had been carrying for a long time. How much, he told her. She did not respond immediately. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line slow, and even the breath of someone absorbing a number that rearranges the architecture of everything they thought they understood. $75 billion, she said. Yes, And she never... No. Another long silence. The board session, Diane said. She'll be there. Yes, Cole said, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It was not a question. No, he said. There isn't. He heard Diane set down her sparkling water, heard the particular sound of a woman who had spent years dispensing opinions from a position of certainty sitting very still in the sudden absence of that certainty. I see, she said. That was all. The call ended. Cole sat in his office until the city outside the windows went dark, and the lights came on and the financial district became the nighttime version of itself. Quieter, emptier, the hum of the day replaced by the hum of what the day had left behind. His phone showed 14 missed calls. 3 from Tara's number, which was new. She had been ignoring him for days, and the sudden reversal felt less like reconciliation and more like a woman who needed something specific and had run out of other options. He did not call back. He picked up the board summons, read it one more time. Special session, 14 days. New executive leadership effective upon majority vote. He set it down. Somewhere in the city, in a building 11 minutes away, in an office that smelled like old mahogany and careful money and the particular quiet of a place where serious things happened, Morgan Jenkins was preparing. He knew this the way you know things when it is too late for knowing to help with the clarity that arrives after the moment for action has passed, when all that remains is to sit with the understanding of what you did not see and why you did not see it and what it is going to cost you. He reached for his phone one more time. He opened her contact. He looked at her name for a long time. He put the phone back down. There was nothing left to say. And somewhere in the place beneath words where the truth lives before it surfaces, he had known that for a long time too. The board session was scheduled for a Thursday, 10 a.m., 14th floor conference room. The one with the long table that seated 20 and the view of the city that Cole had always considered the firm's best asset, after its reputation, a room designed to make people feel the weight of decisions made inside it. He arrived at 8:30, 2 hours early. He had not slept well in 11 days since the courier arrived with the cream-colored envelope, since his attorney had read him the name, Morgan Hargrove Jenkins, off a Delaware incorporation document in a voice carefully emptied of everything except the facts. He had spent those 11 days in a sequence of meetings and calls and late evenings at his desk that had produced collectively very little because the situation he was in was not one that meetings and calls and late evenings could resolve. It was one that had already been resolved by someone else over 14 months in a building 11 minutes away while he was at Meridian drinking Burgundy and talking about the next chapter. He sat at the head of the table, his chair, his table, his room. For the next hour and 20 minutes he sat there alone in the particular silence of a man waiting for something he cannot stop and cannot prepare for adequately, no matter how much time he is given. The other board members arrived between 9:40 and 9:55. Dennis came in without making eye contact, which told Cole everything about where Dennis was in his thinking. 2 independent directors, both appointed 3 years ago, both men Cole had personally selected, arrived together and sat on the same side of the table, which was also information. Cole's attorney sat to his right with a leather portfolio and the carefully neutral expression of a professional who has advised his client of the likely outcomes and has nothing left to add until the proceedings begin. At 9:58, Raymond Clark walked in. Cole had looked him up. Had spent the better part of 2 evenings researching Raymond Clark's CFO of Hargrove Capital 19 years with the firm Edward Hargrove's most trusted operational partner. A man who had built a career in the discipline of making large things move without being seen. He was 62 in photographs online. In person, he was slightly taller than Cole expected, with the measured movements of someone who had walked into a great many rooms with a great many folders and understood that the folder was never the point. He carried a briefcase. He sat in the chair directly across from Cole. He did not introduce himself. He opened the briefcase, removed a series of documents, and placed them in a neat stack in front of him with the quiet efficiency of a man who has done exactly this before and knows precisely how it ends. At 10 o'clock, the door opened again. Cole looked up, and there she was. Morgan wore black. Not dramatically, not the black of someone making a statement about mourning or power or the theater of arrival. The quiet black of someone who had chosen her clothes that morning, the way she chose everything deliberately without waste, for exactly the purpose required. A structured blazer-tailored trousers, low heels. Her hair was down the shoulder-length natural twist-out that Cole had seen every morning for 9 years and somehow never looked at properly. She walked in without hurrying. She did not look at Cole. She did not look at Diane, who had arrived at 9:45 and sat in an observer's chair along the wall. Not a board seat because Diane had no board seat, but a chair she had placed herself in, with the authority of a woman who had always considered her presence in this firm's decisions a given regardless of what the organizational chart said. Morgan sat down at the far end of the table, not the head, not a position of theatrical dominance, simply the seat that was hers by virtue of what she represented in this room, the seat where the majority shareholders' representative sat, which happened to be the seat directly opposite Cole, across the full length of the long table with the city visible through the windows behind her. She opened her folder, clicked her pen, looked at Raymond. "Let's begin," she said. Raymond spoke first. He had the particular gift of people who communicate complex things clearly, no unnecessary language, no hedging, no softening of facts that did not require softening. He laid out the ownership structure of Jenkins and Holt as it currently stood, the acquisition history, the timeline, the holding entities, the final position. 70%. He named the figure without emphasis, the way you name a fact that does not require emphasis because it is sufficient on its own. He then placed a document in the center of the table, the Delaware Incorporation filing for Hargrove Capital LLC, and read from it in the same even tone. Principal owner and chief executive officer of Hargrove Capital LLC, Morgan Hargrove Jenkins. He slid copies down the table to each board member. Cole took his copy, looked at it, set it face down. Raymond continued. He outlined the Hargrove Capital portfolio, not the full scope, not the $75 billion in its entirety, but enough. Enough to establish that the entity now holding majority control of Jenkins and Holt was not a shell, not a speculative position, not a hostile actor in the conventional sense. It was a 40-year-old private investment firm of considerable standing, conservatively managed with holdings across 11 cities and 23 countries, now formally under the operational leadership of its new CEO. He paused. The total value of assets under Hargrove Capital Management as of the most recent quarterly valuation, Raymond said, is $75.4 billion. The room absorbed this. Cole heard it land the number he had known for 11 days, the number his attorney had read to him over the phone, the number he had turned over in his mind at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, in the house that still had Morgan's handwriting on the grocery list, and it landed differently here, spoken aloud in this room, by this man, in front of these people, than it had in any of those private moments. It landed like the closing of a door. To his left, one of the independent directors exhaled slowly through his nose. Dennis across the table looked at the document in his hands with the expression of a man revising a great deal of his understanding of the past 9 years simultaneously. Cole's attorney wrote something in his portfolio and did not look up. From the observer's chair along the wall, Diane Okafor sat very still in her purple and gold dress hands, folded in her lap, looking at the woman at the end of the table with an expression that Cole, glancing sideways, could not read. He had never been unable to read his mother before. The governance review took 40 minutes. Raymond presented the audit findings, the JH Advisory LLC irregularities, the equity restructuring that Cole had undertaken without full board disclosure, the Meridian Advisory Services arrangement, and its associated liabilities. He presented these not as accusations, but as findings documented sourced attached as exhibits to the board package that had been distributed in advance. Cole's attorney raised 3 objections. Raymond's response to each was a page number and a paragraph reference. The objections did not survive contact with the documents. Dennis asked 2 questions quite specific, the questions of a man who had already read everything and wanted certain things confirmed on the record. Raymond confirmed them. The independent directors asked no questions. They had read the board package. At 11:22, Raymond reached the final section of his presentation. Hargrove Capital, as 70% majority shareholder, moves to exercise its rights under Article 7, Section 3 of the Jenkins and Holt Partnership Agreement to appoint new executive leadership effective immediately upon majority vote. He looked around the table. The proposed appointment Morgan Hargrove Jenkins as Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Jenkins and Holt Consulting Group effective today. Cole looked at the table in front of him, at the grain of the wood, at the reflection of the ceiling lights in the polished surface, at his own hands very still on either side of the document he had placed face down 20 minutes ago. He did not look up. The vote was called. Raymond in favor. Dennis in favor. Said quietly, without drama, with the tone of a man who had reached a conclusion he was at peace with. Independent Director 1 in favor. Independent Director 2 in favor. Cole's attorney noted his client's abstention for the record. Raymond looked at Morgan. "The motion carries," he said. "Ms. Jenkins, the floor is yours." The room was quiet. Morgan looked down at the open folder in front of her. At the first page, the one she had been working toward for 14 months through 5:15 mornings in green folders, and the chair that fit, and the snake plant on the windowsill, and 43 pages in Patricia's office, and the promise she had kept at a graveside in November cold. She looked up. She looked at Dennis first. A brief acknowledgement, the nod of two people who have worked alongside each other long enough to communicate without words. She looked at Raymond, who gave her nothing in return, except the steady attention of a man who had spent 19 years working for her father and was now for the first time looking at the person who came next. She did not look at Cole. She did not look at Diane. She looked at the city through the windows behind Cole's chair, her father's city, the one he had built inside of quietly for 40 years, the one that had not known his name and did not know hers yet and would in time learn both. She picked up her pen. She spoke for 4 minutes, not about Cole, not about the marriage or the divorce or the office with the floor-to-ceiling windows or the key card or the morning in the lobby with the coffee cup. She spoke about the firm, its clients, its people, its actual strengths, underneath the recent mismanagement and what she intended to do with them. She spoke in the language of someone who had read every document, understood every number, and was not here for the drama of arrival, but for the work of what came next. When she finished, the room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before, not the tense silence of people waiting for something to happen, but the settled silence of people understanding that something already had. She closed her folder. "We'll schedule individual meetings with each of you this week," she said. "Raymond has the calendar." She stood. And then for the first time since she had walked into the room, she looked at Cole. Just once. Briefly. The look of someone completing a task that required acknowledgement rather than emotion, the way you look at a closed account, a settled matter, a number that has finally added up. Then she looked away. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, paused at the frame, her hand on the wood, and said without turning around, "Patricia will be in touch about the remaining paperwork." And she walked out. Behind her in the conference room on the 14th floor, Cole Jenkins sat at the head of a table in a room that no longer operated on his authority, in a chair that was still physically his, for approximately the next 48 hours, looking at the city through windows he had always believed told him something true about how far he had come. From the observer's chair along the wall, Diane stood slowly, picked up her bag, straightened her purple and gold dress. She walked to the door without speaking to Cole. At the threshold she stopped, did not turn around. "I told you," she said very quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to the room itself, or perhaps to 20 years of her own certainty finally meeting its accounting, that she was more organized than she let on. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her. Cole sat alone at the long table in the room with the view, in the silence of everything that had just happened, and everything that was still to come and did not move for a very long time. The office was very quiet on Friday morning. Not the quiet of a place at rest, the quiet of a place that has been reorganized overnight and hasn't yet decided what sound it makes under new management. The staff of Jenkins and Holt had received an email at 6:47 that morning from an address they did not recognize, with a subject line that read, "Leadership Transition Effective Immediately." The email was 3 paragraphs, professional, clear. It named Morgan Hargrove Jenkins as the incoming managing director, and CEO outlined a town hall scheduled for the following Monday and asked everyone to direct operational questions to Raymond Clark in the interim. It was signed Morgan H. Jenkins, CEO Jenkins, and Holt Consulting Group / Hargrove Capital LLC. By 8:15, the open plan area was full of people who had read the email and were performing the particular theater of people who have received significant news and are trying to process it while appearing to work. Keyboards clicked, coffee was poured. Conversations happened in low voices near the windows and stopped when someone walked past. Keisha at the reception desk read the email twice, thought about the Tuesday morning she had pretended not to notice Morgan walking down the hallway with her snake plant, and felt something she could not quite name settle into place. Cole cleaned out his office on Friday afternoon. He had been given until 5 o'clock a detail communicated by Patricia Wells's office, in a letter so precisely worded that his attorney had read it 3 times, looking for something to contest and found nothing. The letter outlined the terms of his exit from Jenkins and Holt with the thoroughness of a document prepared by people who had anticipated every objection in advance and answered them preemptively. He had a box, one box, the kind you get from the supply room standard size, brown cardboard, the universal container of professional endings. He moved through the office slowly, picking up the things that were his and leaving the things that weren't, which turned out to be most of what the room contained. The furniture was the firm's. The artwork was the firm's. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows was in some sense that felt more literal today than it ever had before, no longer his. He took the photograph from his desk, him and Dennis, at the opening of the first office 9 years ago, both younger and considerably less complicated. He took a book his father had given him, a pen, a small award from an industry association that now felt like an artifact from a previous version of his life. He filled approximately 1/3 of the box. He stood in the center of the office for a moment, box in his hands, and looked at the room, at the windows, at the city. He had spent 9 years in this room building something he believed was his. He had spent 14 months dismantling it without knowing that was what he was doing. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. The doors opened. He stepped in. Nobody said goodbye. Not because they were cruel, the staff of Jenkins and Holt were not by and large cruel people, but because goodbyes require a shared understanding of what is ending and what it meant, and what was ending here was too tangled and too recent for anyone to have found the language for it yet. The elevator descended. The lobby doors opened onto the street. Cole Jenkins walked out of the building that had his name on it for approximately 72 more hours until the signage contractor arrived Monday morning, and into the ordinary Friday afternoon of a city that did not notice him leave. The IRS matter moved quickly. Tara's documentation, combined with the audit findings Raymond had presented at the board session, gave the investigators a map that was unusually complete for this kind of case, the kind of completeness that happens when two separate sources of information assembled independently corroborate each other at every significant point. Susan Holt had advised Tara to cooperate fully, which Tara did with the focused efficiency of a woman who had made her decision in a kitchen over a cup of tea and had not second-guessed it since. The personal guarantee was voided within 10 days. Susan's motion argued fraudulent inducement, and the documentation supporting it was, in her professional assessment, about as clean as she had seen in 20 years of practice. Cole's exposure on the J.H. Advisory LLC transactions was, according to his attorney, significant. Not immediately resolved, not yet a defined outcome, but significant in the way that significant tends to mean expensive, protracted, and unlikely to end in a position resembling where you started. Tara moved out of the house on a Saturday. She did it the way Morgan had cleared her office efficiently, without drama, taking what was hers and leaving what wasn't. She had a bag and 2 suitcases and a friend with a car waiting downstairs. She did not leave a note. She did not look back at the house as the car pulled away. She looked forward through the windshield at the street ahead with the expression of a woman who has learned something expensive and is deciding what to do with the education. Diane sold the house in April, not because she had to, not immediately, not yet. The legal situation was still unresolved, the costs were still accumulating, and the precise shape of what she would ultimately owe remained to be determined. But she sold it because the house had become a place she no longer recognized. Too large, too quiet, full of the specific weight of a life organized around certainties that had turned out to be something else. She bought a smaller place across town, 2 bedrooms, a garden she had not planned for, but found herself tending on Sunday mornings with the focused attention of someone who needed something that grew at its own pace and did not require management. She did not call Cole. Not out of cruelty. Diane Okafor was many things, but cruelty was not among them. She did not call because she was in the process of understanding something that required quiet, to understand something about the difference between supporting someone and absorbing their decisions as your own, and she needed to do that understanding privately, without the noise of his voice, asking her for things she could no longer provide. She had called him once 2 weeks after the board session. "I owe Morgan an apology," she said when he answered. Cole was quiet for a moment. "She won't take your call." "I know," Diane said. "I'm going to write her a letter." She did not ask Cole's opinion on this. She was past asking Cole's opinion on things that concerned Morgan. The letter took her 4 drafts and 11 days. She was not certain Morgan had read it. She was not certain she deserved to know whether Morgan had read it. She sent it anyway because some things need to be said regardless of whether they are received, and because her father had taught her a very long time ago, in a kitchen that smelled like cornbread and accountability, that the apology you owe someone is not contingent on their willingness to accept it. You owe it regardless. You pay it regardless. Cole sat in his car on a Thursday evening. He had driven here without deciding to the way you drive places when your hands know where you're going before your mind has given them permission. The building was lit from inside, warm gold light, behind the glass, the kind of light that means people are working late because they want to, not because they have to. The sign beside the main entrance read Hargrove Capital. Below it, smaller Jenkins and Holt Consulting Group, a Hargrove Capital company. He had driven past this building every day for 14 months. He had never thought to look up. He sat in the car for a long time, long enough for the light on the 38th floor to go dark, and then longer still in the particular stillness of a man sitting with the full weight of what he had not seen, and why he had not seen it, and what it had cost him, and whether the cost was a consequence of bad luck or bad character, and which of those answers he was more capable of living with. He did not have a conclusion. He thought about Morgan standing at her father's graveside in the November cold. 11 people. He thought about the white lilies. He thought about the way she had set her coffee cup down in the lobby slowly without a sound, with the hands that weren't shaking. He thought about 9 years. About the room above the print shop. About the logo she had designed on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea and a sketch pad. About all the decisions he had absorbed as his own that had her fingerprints on them, all the directions that had worked because she was behind them all the mornings she had been at her desk before him and the evenings she had stayed after. He thought about what he had done with all of that. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking space and drove into the city, the ordinary Thursday evening city full of people moving toward home and dinner, and the small, reliable pleasures of lives that were intact. He drove without the radio on, in the particular silence of a man who has run out of things to tell himself that aren't true. He did not call Morgan. He knew now, with the clean certainty that comes when every alternative has been exhausted, that there was nothing he could say to her that would be adequate to what had happened. Not because she was beyond words, but because the gap between what he had assumed about her and what she had actually been was so large that any words he placed across it would be swallowed by the distance before they arrived. Some distances are too large for words. Some things you simply have to carry. He drove home. The house was empty when he got there. It had been empty for weeks since Tara left, since the particular silence of a space from which people have departed settled in and made itself comfortable. He put his keys on the counter. The grocery list was still on the refrigerator: almond milk, lemons, green tea, the good olive oil, not the other one. He had not removed it. He was not sure he ever would. He stood in the kitchen for a long time in the quiet of everything he had built and lost, and never properly seen, and then he turned off the light and went to bed. He had driven past that building every day for 14 months. He had never once looked up. She woke at 5:15, not because an alarm told her to, because her father had woken at 5:15 every morning for as long as she could remember, and his rhythm had become hers without either of them planning it, and this morning of all mornings she was glad for it. Glad for the quiet. Glad for the dark outside the windows and the coffee she made by memory in the small kitchen, and the city below that had not yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. She dressed without hurrying. Black trousers. A cream blouse. Soft, simple, the kind of thing her father would have called appropriate without being asked. She put on the watch he had worn for 30 years, the one Patricia had given her along with the chair and the pen and the small bronze sculpture that now sat on the windowsill beside the snake plant in the office on the 38th floor. The watch was too large for her wrist. She wore it anyway. She took her coffee to the window and stood there in the dark looking at the city. Her father's city. Hers now. She arrived at the office at 6:03. The building was quiet at this hour. The lobby guard nodded as she came through the elevator, hummed upward in the particular silence of a machine, doing its work before the rest of the world had arrived to witness it. The 38th floor was dark except for the ambient glow of the city through the windows and the small lamp she kept on in the corner by her father's chair. She had left it on deliberately. She did not turn on the overhead lights. She moved through the office in the half-dark setting, her coffee on the desk opening the blinds on the east-facing window, so the first light, whenever it came, would come in unobstructed. She had learned this from her father, too. He had always opened the east window first, said it was important to see where the day was coming from. She sat down in his chair. It still fit. The office had been hers for 6 weeks now. 6 weeks of 5:15 mornings and green folders, and the long conference table, and Raymond's measured voice walking her through decisions that were large enough to require steadiness rather than speed. 6 weeks of learning the weight of what her father had built, not just the scale of it, which she had understood since Patricia's office, but the texture. The specific character of 40 years of patient, disciplined, invisible work. She was still learning. She expected to be learning for a long time. Her father had been learning until the end. She knew this from the notebooks she had found in the bottom drawer of the desk, 12 of them filled with his handwriting in the precise, unhurried script of a man who wrote things down not to remember them but to understand them more completely. She had read 2 of the notebooks so far. She was reading the third slowly, the way you read something when you want to be inside it rather than finished with it. The most recent entry was dated 11 days before he died. The asset that compounds fastest is judgment. Everything else, money, relationships, reputation, follows from it or doesn't. Build judgment first, build it quietly, build it in situations where nobody's watching, and the outcome doesn't matter yet, because those are the only conditions under which it grows without performance getting in the way. She had written this on a card and placed it on her desk where she could see it. She looked at it every morning. Patricia came in at 8:30, not for a meeting. They had their regular Thursday session later in the week. She came in the way she sometimes did, unscheduled, carrying the jerk chicken from the place on Halstead and the particular energy of a woman who has something to say that is not quite business and not quite personal, but lives in the territory between. She set the container on the conference table, sat down, looked at Morgan for a moment with the focused attention she had been directing at Morgan since November at the graveside, when she had first understood that the woman standing alone in the cold was not who Cole Jenkins had assumed she was. "The divorce is finalized," Patricia said. Morgan nodded. She had known it was coming, had known the approximate date for 2 weeks. When? Yesterday afternoon, 4:47 p.m. Patricia paused. "The prenup held exactly as your father intended. Cole's attorneys withdrew their challenge 10 days ago. There was nothing to challenge." Morgan looked at the city through the window. "And the IRS matter?" "Still in process. His attorneys are negotiating. It will take time, but the exposure is clear and it's significant." Patricia opened the jerk chicken. "He's not going to recover from this quickly, Morgan. I want you to understand that not for your satisfaction, but because it means there may be things that come up. Requests, intermediaries, people who think they're doing him a favor by approaching you on his behalf." "I know," Morgan said. And nothing." Morgan said simply, "I wish him no harm. I don't wish him anything. That chapter is closed." Patricia looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded the nod of a woman who has seen enough endings to recognize when someone means what they say. "Your father would be proud," she said. It was not the kind of thing Patricia Wells said often, which was exactly why it landed the way it did, not as comfort, not as performance, but as the particular weight of a true thing spoken by someone who had known both people long enough to mean it. Morgan looked down at the desk, at her father's watch on her wrist, at the card with the notebook entry, at the pen, the one he had used to sign every contract, the one that had been waiting in the drawer of this desk for 14 months for the right hand to pick it up. She did not cry. She did not need to. She had done that privately on her own time, in her own space, the way he had taught her. She had done it in November at the graveside and again in the elevator, coming down from Patricia's office, after the first reading of the will, and once more on a Sunday morning in the early weeks at Hargrove Capital, when she had opened the second notebook and found on the third page in her father's handwriting, "For Morgan, when the time comes, the work is the love. Everything else is commentary." She had cried then, quietly, for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she had closed the notebook, washed her face, and gone back to the desk. Patricia left at 9:15. The office was quiet again, the good quiet, the kind that belongs to places where serious work happens, and the work is currently not being done yet, but will be soon. The kind of quiet her father had described in the notebooks as the best hour of the day, before the decisions, when all the options are still open. Morgan stood at the east window. The sun was up now, fully properly, the city lit from the east in the flat, clear light of a morning that had decided to be uncomplicated. She could see the building across the street where Jenkins and Holt's original offices had been. Not the print shop that was gone, replaced twice over, but the building they had moved into in year 3, when the firm had grown enough to need more than one room. She had designed the layout of that office, too. Had spent a weekend with graph paper and a tape measure making sure the light came in right. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked away. She walked to her desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one where she had found the notebooks, and reached to the back past the remaining journals and withdrew a single item she had been saving for this morning specifically. She had known when she put it here 3 weeks ago that there would be a morning that was right for it. She had waited for the morning the way her father had waited for things, without impatience, without forcing it, trusting that the right time has a quality to it that you recognize when it arrives. It was a piece of paper, plain, white, unlined. At the top, in the clean formal typeface of the Hargrove Capital letterhead, it read Morgan Hargrove Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer. Below that, a single line waiting. She sat down. She picked up her father's pen. She felt the weight of it, the specific gravity of an object that has been used for 40 years, to make things real, to turn decisions into documents, to move the world from intention to fact. It was heavier than it looked. She had noticed this the first time she held it. She had come to understand it as accurate. She signed her name. Not quickly. not with the automatic efficiency of someone signing a form. She wrote each letter the way her father had taught her to write her name at 7 years old, at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, deliberately, with the understanding that your name on a page is not just identification but declaration. This is who I am. This is what I stand behind. This is real. Morgan Hargrove Jenkins. She set the pen down. She looked at the signature for a moment, at the name that was hers and her father's, and 40 years of quiet, careful, invisible work made visible at last in 11 letters on a white page in the morning light. Then she looked up, at the city, at the east window, at the light coming in from the direction her father had always said it was important to see. She breathed, not the held breath of someone waiting for something to begin or end, just breath. The ordinary, sufficient, uncomplicated breath of a woman sitting in her office on a Thursday morning, in her father's chair, wearing his watch, holding the pen. He left her with the city spread out below her, and the work spread out ahead, and the quiet knowledge, not loud, not triumphant, simply present and entirely hers, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had not needed anyone to see it. She had not needed anyone to say it. She picked up the first file of the morning. She opened it. She began. Strength isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and entirely hers. The lesson I keep coming back to from Morgan's story isn't about money. It isn't about revenge either, because if you watched carefully, Morgan never took revenge. She took back what was hers. Those are different things, and the difference matters. What stays with me is this: Morgan never performed weakness, and she'd never performed strength. She just was. She moved through 14 months of being dismissed and replaced and looked past, and she used every single day of it. Not to plot, not to punish, to prepare, to build something real in the direction of something true. Her father taught her that the asset that compounds fastest is judgment, and what Morgan did in that office on the 38th floor, while Cole was at Meridian talking about next chapters, was build judgment. Quietly. On her own time. In her own space. The people who underestimated her did so because she let them. She understood the way her father understood that being underestimated by the wrong people is not a disadvantage. It is a condition of work. It gives you time and space and the particular freedom of someone who is not being watched. She used that freedom well. If this story spoke to something you've lived through, if you've ever been the person in the hallway, holding the coffee, watching someone hand your work to someone else, and you didn't say anything because you were already thinking 3 steps ahead, drop it in the comments. I want to know. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign. Because there are more stories like Morgan's coming, and you don't want to find out what happened in the comments.